While this has a very long history, so we're not here all night, we're going to start in the 1980s. In the late 1980s, President George Bush, the elder, held an education summit with the National Governors Association. The chairman at the time was a man named William Clinton, so you can see you have both D and R. This is an issue that crosses all lines, so you've got both Democrats and Republicans on both sides of this aisle. At this issue is when they both decided they were going to set national education goals, which basically broke local control, where the federal government said they're going to redefine their role from equal opportunity to mandating equal results. And so the federal government changed how it interacted with the schools at that time. When it did that, it used money to do that. There really is no role for the federal government in education. So the way that the federal government gets into the local schools is they use money. In the 1960s, President Johnson was in office, and as part of the war on poverty, they passed what was called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, ESEA. The bill was 35 pages long, I think. And it was a formula grant. The districts and the states got money based on the poverty figures for the state, and then it broke down into districts and then into school buildings. When the federal government gives money, it gives this much money for this much time. When the time is up, either the program goes away because the money goes away, or the federal government has to pass new legislation to authorize more money to keep the program going. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act has been reauthorized multiple times since the 1960s. One of the most famous reauthorizations was called No Child Left Behind, which was actually the Elementary and Secondary Education Act again. Last December, the federal government reauthorized federal money based on that ESEA again. This time it was called the Every Student Succeeds Act, but it's basically a continuation of that original 1965 authorization of federal funds. The Every Student Succeeds Act is over 1,100 pages long. Remember, the first bill was 30-some pages. So you can see that the federal government continues to up the ante as they give money. Now, when the bill was passed, a number of things changed, and one of the things that changed was how the federal government mandates testing to the states and the districts. So this is right out of the laws. NCLB is No Child Left Behind. ESSA is Every Student Succeeds. That's new law. No Child Left Behind said there had to be one test between grades 3 and 5. The new law says there has to be one test every year, one in grade 3, one in grade 4, one in grade 5. No Child Left Behind, one test between grades 6 and 9. ESSA, now 3 tests, one in each grade. The high school tests are the same. So the total mandated tests under No Child Left Behind were 3. The total mandated tests in this new legislation, 7. So the federal government has increased the number of tests that it is mandating that states and therefore school districts implement. At the same time, the school districts, the new legislation comes down much harder on parents opting out. So the original law encouraged states and therefore districts to do a 95% participation rate. The reason they went 95% participation is because if you have more than 5% of the kids opting out, it messes up the data collection on the federal end. So it's about data collection, and that 95% number is kind of a magic number. The new legislation says there must be a state law in order for parents to be allowed to opt out. So the federal legislation says they'll honor a state law, but if there isn't one, then the parents, there's an attempt to say the parents cannot opt out. That actually won't hold up in court. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled more than 12 times that parents are the primary educators, but the federal legislation does attempt to step over it. There is also in this new law that districts are told that they will have penalties if they have more than 5% of the children opting out of the law. Whether they'll be able to make that stick is problematic at best. Last year here in New York, you had, not this year, but in the last academic year, statewide you had more than 20% of the children opt out of the test, and the feds backed down on cutting funding. The legislation actually doesn't, it's a formula grant, it's based on your poverty numbers, so they don't really have the ability to take the money away because it doesn't allow for that. But what they attempt to do in the law is tell the districts, well, we'll use it as a club. So there's a lot of pressure built into the law onto the districts to have the districts be the bad guys, to tell the parents, well, we'll lose money if you don't let your kids take the test. In No Child Left Behind, there were no limits on the amount of tests. The federal legislation limits the amount of time that the district can spend in testing, but they increase the number of federal tests. So here's what we mandate, but now you can use less testing, which has the effect of making the federal tests more critical, more important. The tests that the federal government approves are the ones that become like more central to it. And No Child Left Behind said 100% proficiency. This new law doesn't say 100%, but it does mandate that every district show improvement every year. Eventually that would get you to 100% if you're going to show improvement every year. But it is mandatory improvement in the test results. Now, how do these tests work? Well, there's a number of ways that